seventh grade, I went to the DMV to get my new license. Your parents, just like everyone else in the country, have to get a new license. And in California, I think it's called a real ID or something like that. So you have to go to the DMV. And the DMV is notorious for being like really slow and inefficient. And they don't really, there's no good customer service. They just kind of move you along like cattle. They treat you like livestock. Um, that's what the DMV is known for. So I went to the DMV and I was in line and, social distancing and everything. And nobody was paying attention to me. I wasn't getting any attention from anyone at the DMV. So I got really frustrated. So I coughed on purpose. And boy, oh boy, that gave me more attention than I've ever received in the DMV. That's a joke. I didn't actually do that. I didn't even go to the DMV. I just wanted to tell that joke. Man, it used to be that I would cough to cover up like a fart, and now you fart to cover up a cough. Isn't that crazy? Jeez. Anyways, so much for my great stand-up routine here, huh? I'm practicing. I heard a pretty good rule, though, about how to know if you're social distancing correctly. It goes like this. If you can smell their fart, stand further apart. That's a good rule. I think you gotta store that away. All right. So, yeah, there's a bunch of scientists that are like testing how social distancing and public policies and things like that can affect the spread of the disease. And I think the social science community has really figured out that the spread of the coronavirus is based on two things: how dense the population is and how dense the population is. Get it? All right. Enough with the jokes. So in the last video, I said that there were two reasons that the Roman Empire fell that historians have pointed out, and only one of those reasons made it onto my slide for some reason. I don't know what happened when I uploaded this. Sometimes when I upload the slides, I lose a lot of stuff. So in the previous video, I said that one reason that the Roman Empire fell apart, according to historians, was that its wealthiest citizens kind of stopped being good citizens. They stopped paying attention to what the government was doing. They stopped caring about corruption and things like that. A second reason that historians believe the Roman Empire fell apart is because it just got too big. It spread out too wide, and what ended up happening is the military leaders that were put in charge of soldiers that were like 1,000 miles away or 2,000 miles away from Rome, the further distant they were from Rome or Constantinople or wherever the emperor was, the more they started to behave like petty tyrants. So they would pretend not to receive communications from the emperor, or they would just flat out disobey the emperor. And so this created a sense that the Roman Empire was pretty penetrable because the emperors failed to have a solid control over their soldiers. And so what ended up happening is a lot of kingdoms and tribes outside of the Roman Empire started to attack different parts of it all at the same time. And because Rome was so spread out, its soldiers were just like spread out across the entire empire, recalling the soldiers to defend parts of the empire was really, really difficult. All right. So we are on, let's see, slide 5, the one that says the rise and fall of the Franks in Europe. So there it was one particular European tribe after the fall of the Roman Empire that rose to prominence in Europe. And this tribe was called the Franks. right? They were a Germanic tribe. That means they're from what we would consider to be modern day Germany, right? That's where they originated. And these Franks rose to prominence primarily through warfare and because they had very strong leadership. And the Franks were able to unite most of Central and Western Europe between the year 717 and 814. And the most important Frankish leader was a guy named Charlemagne, who you've probably heard of. Charlemagne was the son of a Frankish leader we don't really care about named Pepin the Short. But Pepin the Short's father, Charlemagne's grandfather, was another great Frankish leader we care about named Charles Martel. All right. So Charles Martel was a Frankish military leader who was known as Charles the Hammer. That's what Martel means. It means hammer. Right? So Charles Martel was a very powerful military leader. And he was known for winning a few victories. Most notably, he won a very famous victory against Muslim invaders during this period called the Battle of Tours. So if you remember our study of Islam and how Islam had spread primarily through jihad, through military conquest, Islam had spread into Spain, North Africa. When the Roman Empire collapsed, Islam was very aggressive in pursuing a lot of territories they were previously unable to penetrate. And Islam moved like a wave over Europe until they met Charles Martel in what is called the Battle of Tours. And Charles Martel defeated the Muslims in the Battle of Tours and essentially kept Islam out of Europe for most of its history, with the exception of Spain. Spain had a heavy Muslim influence. Parts of Italy did, but really Islamic influence in Europe was limited to Spain because of Charles Martel. All right, so Charles Martel's grandson, Charlemagne, is actually the greatest Frankish leader, and he changes the world, really, not just Europe. He changes the whole world forever after his rule. So Charlemagne is most notable for establishing kingship in Europe. Right? So Europe previously had several small kingdoms and they each had kings, but Charlemagne was the one who said the king is not only the head of a little kingdom, he is the head of an entire government. Right? So we're not going to have wealthy nobles running the show. We're going to have a king in charge of government. Right? And Charlemagne was really unique in his ability to do this because he worked with the Pope to achieve this. So Charlemagne was very smart in being a big supporter of the Catholic Church and being a supporter of the Pope and the Pope's authority. So with the help of the Pope, Charlemagne made himself king. Right? So Charlemagne established the idea that a legitimate king needed to have the support of the church in order to have legitimate rule over his subjects. Right? So Charlemagne went to the Pope and said, hey, I'm a big supporter of the church. I'm the supporter of your power as Pope. But Europe needs a king, not just a religious leader. So I want you to basically bless my rule as king of the Frankish Empire, which was basically in control of Europe at this point. And in exchange, as king, I'm going to promote Christianity throughout all of Europe. I'm going to try to make Europe a Christian continent, a Christian civilization. So this will increase the power and wealth of the church, and it will also increase my power and my wealth. So this was an agreement made by two allies that benefited both. Right? Now, unfortunately, when Charlemagne died, there was a big power vacuum. Right? And we discussed in the last video what a power vacuum is. A power vacuum happens when a very powerful institution, person, force, empire, civilization disappears. Right? And all of these things that are dependent on it kind of collapse in on themselves. And it leads to a lot of chaos. So when Charlemagne dies, he leaves a major power vacuum. And because of this, different feudal lords fought for power in Europe. We know what feudal lords are from our study of feudalism in Japan. Right? And Europe falls apart into a big state of war. The Franks lose control of Europe because they no longer have a strong king in charge. But the Catholic Church actually does pretty well in this power vacuum, right? Because of Charlemagne's support when he was alive, the Catholic Church was able to establish pretty deep roots throughout all of Europe. Much of Europe Christianized. Monasteries and churches and bishops were installed throughout Europe. So the church became extremely powerful in Europe, more powerful in Europe than it had ever been during the Roman Empire, in fact. Okay, so let's compare Catholicism in Europe to Catholicism in the Roman Empire. And by the way, it's important to realize that pretty much all Christians at this time are Catholics. There's a few Christian sects here and there. There's some heresies going around who have been excommunicated and are no longer a part of the Catholic Church. But for the most part, I would say like 99% of Christians in the world at this time are Catholics, the Roman Catholics, or they're Byzantine Catholics, which at this time is still part of the Roman Catholic Church, the Catholic Church established by Christ. Because the Great Schism, if you remember to our study of the Byzantine Empire, happens a few centuries later. Right? So pretty much everyone in the world is Catholic, subject to the Pope, who is the Bishop of Rome. The only difference between Byzantine Catholics and Roman Catholics is Byzantine Catholics follow the Eastern Rite, meaning their sacraments and their liturgy is a little bit different than the Western Rite, but they're still all part of the same church. All right. So in Rome, the Emperor Constantine, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but he basically makes Christianity, i.e. Catholicism, the official religion of the Roman Empire. Right? And because of this, the Catholic Church starts to acquire tremendous power. When Rome falls, however, Christians are really concerned that the Catholic Church might collapse with it, but this doesn't happen, in part because of the several ways that the Catholic Church managed to remain independent of the Roman Empire, right? So when Rome was dying, a lot of the popes did something that was pretty smart, right? Instead of devoting all their resources to trying to preserve the emperor and the power of the Roman Empire, a lot of popes started to send monks and missionaries into Europe and establish monasteries there and spread Christianity there. Additionally, the popes started to make sure that monks and nuns, priests, bishops were educated. At the very least, they needed to be able to read and write. Many of them started to receive formal educations under tutors at different schools and even at universities. So when the Roman Empire collapsed, people were dependent not on officials of the Roman government anymore, but on monks, on nuns, on priests, on bishops to be able to do things like read legal documents, settle disputes, right? Take care of the sick, plan cities, make public policies. So this made the Catholic Church and its clergy very well respected and very powerful because they were the only ones that people could rely on to establish and apply the law, right, to organize society.